This program is made possible in part by the National Endowment for the Arts.
I realize that I'm blessed with Peter Flannery to take on that.
Hello and welcome to The Writing Life. I'm George O'Brien of Georgetown University and I'm here with Michael Coady. Michael Coady was born in Carrick-on-Suir, County Tipperary in 1939 and trained as a teacher. He has lived in Carrick his whole life and has recently retired from his teaching position there. He's the author of 4 acclaimed books of poetry, beginning with 2 for a Woman, 3 for a Man in 1980, then Oven Lane in 1987, All Souls 1997, and One Another 2003. In addition to which, his poetry has been widely anthologized and has received a number of important prizes, the Patrick Kavanagh Award in 1979 and the Lawrence O'Shaughnessy Poetry Award in 2004. He's a member of Éasdána, the state organisation in Ireland which officially recognises and supports writers and artists. Of his third book, the poet Kieran Carson said, "It's a symphony." And he goes on, "Few books like All Souls are being written these days, but I would like to think that such a book could only have come out of Ireland. It unites the dramatic and the sophisticated. It speaks through the mouths of people and encompasses all kinds of art." And he praises its wit, its pathos, its reverence, its irreverence, and the integrity of its many connections. So, welcome, Michael.
Thanks very much, George.
To some extent, I suppose you could be called a poet of place. Carrick is the rock that you stand on, as it were. And I'd like to think a little bit about the advantages of being a poet of place.
Yeah, well, I'd like to say, first of all, that I have no alternative. It's the only place I know. It's my world. And I suppose it's my own as well, because I live there, and I've always lived there, and I know it pretty well. And I've, explored its heritage and its history to some extent. So it's not just a question of the horizontal aspect of the place, but the vertical aspect as well. And I'm fascinated by this idea of time in place, how a place is inhabited not just by the current settlement or the people who are there, but by what came before, and that we all sort of coexist in some strange way. Also, in my case, there's a particular advantage I feel in the fact, the geography of the place. It's at the head of the tide on a what is, in Irish terms, quite a big river, and the tide fascinates me. That whole cosmic renewal and evacuation that happens twice every 24 hours. The older I get, the more that fascinates me, and because it's such a symbolic thing for almost everything.
Mm-hmm. And then you have a whole retinue of effects to draw on. You have the characters, you have the cultural practices of the place, the music, for example, and you were very involved with the music of the town, and your people before you were very involved with the music of the town. So there's a lot of texture, I think, in your work, which the town supplies.
That's very true. It's also curious in the sense that how the community, there is a community, and the value of a community is something that, well, everybody knows, I guess, and people only really realize when they've lost it. Mm-hmm. It's a curious thing to be a writer in a community, in the sense that how people look at you as a kind of a storyteller, as a kind of a chronicler, rather than that. In my case anyway, people see me mistakenly as a historian of some kind. Mm. Most so-called ordinary people would see me that way, and are curious when I publish something to know who is that, or what is the real story, or who is he talking about, you know, if things are disguised a little bit. The other side of the thing is that it's a great privilege to have a community. I really sense that as I'm older, and people occasionally embarrass me by saying about myself and my hometown that the town owes a lot to me. Mm. Well, actually, the opposite is the exact truth. Mm. I owe an enormous amount to the town. It is my subject and my world.
Mm-hmm. and you're there recording the music of what happens, as you say.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a wonderful phrase that you have in your piece, the use of memory, where you talk about the nuanced protocol of small town courtesy.
Yes.
And I think that that's a marvelous way of capturing the intimacy. That being a member of a community has certain kinds of obligations and certain kinds
there
of...
are codes.
Yes.
That's
And
true.
to be inside them, but at the same time watching how they operate is something that comes across very well, I think, in the way that you treat Carrick.
Yeah, and it isn't as though I chose this, because I'm interested too in the way things happen to happen. And at a certain point in my life, a job became available, and my family was fairly hard up when I became a teacher, and a job became available in my hometown, and I was needed by the family, and that was really the main thing that brought me back there, and I never regretted it, because there was a time when to be in a small town in Ireland was to be entrapped in some way. But that is no longer true. In fact, the opposite is the case now. I know all the people I know who live in the cities now would love to get back to their small towns.
Yes. And but it's interesting to think of you as a poet in a community, as a person who's able to make connections of a kind that other people might not think of making, and then you're making it for yourself, making them for yourself, but also making them on your on their behalf.
Yes. Yeah.
And I wonder, could we have a poem maybe that might tell us a little bit more about that? The Blue Gate at Lock Street, maybe.
Yes. Well, that's I certainly, it's a poem I still have an affection for, and it really is a meditation on time, I suppose, but particularized in terms of an old wooden gate, which was painted and repainted so many times, and I just happened to notice it one day, as though for the first time, its texture, its timescape, what I call its timescape. A blue gate in Lock Street. The seed, the sun, the days, the leaf and bird song, the axe, the saw and plane, the hands, the years on layered years of tar, the blister and the scar of weathers, all topped in time with this inspired epiphany of blue, the deep, dark blue of spaces, silences. Behind it, through the slow turn of nights, the ritual of hands with yeast and flour, with salt and water, and from the oven, time and time again, the incensed miracle of bread, its truth and grace brought out to light and offered to the morning. All the while, the wood was earning its adagio complexity under the pellet knife of cold and heat, of dark and wind and day, of goings and returnings. Yes, all of it's time-scaped behind a child who's playing hopscotch on the footpath, who's dancing between earth and air against this scarred epiphany of blue, the deep, dark blue of spaces, silences.
Thanks. That's grand. Speaking of connections, one major connection you made, of course, was with America, and in particular with Philadelphia. There are others that we can talk about in a minute, but the story about your connection to Philadelphia is an amazing one. And I wonder, would you mind telling us a little bit about that?
Yes, and in general, I must say that it was only at a certain point in my life that I suddenly realized that this part of my heritage, the American story and everybody's background in Ireland, that I suddenly realized that this was material, that this was relevant to my story. This goes back really to the 1880s, to the Victorian era, and the time of Parnell in Ireland. And my great-grandfather, James Coady, was a boatman on the river. Very lowly profession, people who lived in great poverty in the river lanes of the town. His wife died in childbirth. And he had one remaining child, 6-7 years old boy named Michael. I'm called after him. And James Coady went to America out of desperation after he lost his wife, and I suppose hoped to make a new beginning in America, and perhaps hoped to send for the boy when he got some stability there. But actually, that never happened. The boy didn't hear from his father for 30 years, until he was a man himself with children. and never forgave his father. His father wrote one single letter 30 years on from Philadelphia asking for forgiveness and saying that he had remarried in America. My grandfather, because the boy, the abandoned child, turned out to be my grandfather, Michael, never forgave and never forgot and tore the letter up and threw it in the fire. And my own father was a child at the time and saw this happen and never forgot the drama of that morning that this mysterious letter arrived from America. And my father, in his turn, told me this story about this letter, this unanswered letter. So I heard that story many times from my father in his cups when I was a boy, and I grew up with it. And at some point in my life, it began to fascinate me, all the unanswered questions about it. What had happened to this man in Philadelphia? Why did it take him 30 years to write a letter back to his son? What was the story? What happened? So I attempted to write a poem about it, not knowing the American story. I try to reconstruct and return what I call pre-sequence, a concept that I have of pre-sequence, to return imaginatively to a moment in the past, knowingly from that moment's future, and examine it and take it from there, that point. And I try to write a poem called The Letter, about the thing that changed that man's destiny was the death of his wife in childbirth. That was the beginning of the change in his destiny, which sent him to America. And the poem was published by David Marcus originally, and then subsequently published in my book. And it sort of went out and astonishingly discovered the story for me, really, because a woman in Maryland named Eileen McConnell, a wonderful genealogist, took it up and started a search to find the public record of this man, this boatman, James Coady, who had perhaps lived in Philadelphia in the 1880s. It was as slim as that, the slim little wisp of memory. And over the course of 2 years, she found what could be found. And I found a replication of the Irish tragedy, because this man had been a stevedore in South Philadelphia on the Delaware, so almost a replication of his Irish experience on a larger scale, had remarried. His second wife also died in childbirth, and the rest of his story was a terrible tragedy of losing his children, two of them as young men, after he had lost his second wife, and finally died himself of alcoholism in a lodging house in Philadelphia. We found his grave, and I have since put a stone on his grave. And I've been to America and read the poem and traced out the sites of the story in Philadelphia. So it was quite an amazing story, which I didn't plan.
Yes.
The poem made it happen for me through some curious... what began as a story of an abandoned child ended as the story of an abandoned father.
Yes.
Because I think of the man in Philadelphia who died alone in the end, with his conscience returning to the child he had left in Ireland. And God knows there must be many, many stories like that, but they're buried or forgotten.
Yes.
And the one in my family was half suppressed and forgotten and almost gone out of any memory.
Yes.
Until I picked it up, or it picked me up, I prefer to think.
Yeah. And there's another element too which contributes to it, I think, namely that James Coady's grandson, your own father, was in America but didn't know anything of this.
No, he wasn't. His son was.
His son was?
His son was, yes, my father.
Oh, your father.
My father,
Yes,
yeah.
That's what I meant.
Yes.
Yeah. And I wonder, could you read that poem about your father being in America, Assembly of Parts?
Yes, I will. I'm fascinated by the whole idea of fate or destiny or chance or whatever it is that shapes our lives, especially the question of how our parents come to meet, that central mystery for everybody. You know? And my father came to America as a young unmarried man in the 20s, just in time for the Great Depression. But he had tuberculosis and his health broke down, and the American doctor advised him to get back to Ireland, where he was more or less nursed back to health by his mother. And one night he went to a dance in the local Foresters' Hall, and the girl playing the piano from Waterford with the band, my father fell in love with her, and 3 months later they got married, and 9 months later I was born. So if my father hadn't had a health breakdown in Hartford, a place in which I found myself 50 years later,
Yes.
looking for the factory, the typewriter factory where my father worked, the Underwood factory in Hartford, which was of course long gone. So here's the poem. Assembling the parts. Standing in sunshine by Highway 84, I'm photographing a factory which is no longer there. Looking for my father by an assembly line which has halted and vanished into air. Catching the sepia ghost of a young, tubercular Irishman who's left a rooming house at 6 a.m. in a winter time during the Depression, when my mother is still a girl, playing precocious violin, a miraculous medal under her blouse, in Protestant oratorios in Waterford. A pallid face in the crowd in a dark winter time, he's coughing in the cold, assembling typewriters in Hartford, Connecticut, waiting for blood on his pillow to send him home, where he'll meet her one ordinary night with the band playing Solitude in the Foresters' Hall. 50 years on, he's 9 Septembers dead, and a tourist in sunshine by Highway 84 is photographing a factory which is no longer there, assembling the parts of the mundane mystery, the common enigma of journeys and unscheduled destinations, the lost intersections of person and place and time, uniquely fathering every man out of the dark.
Very, very nice. Thanks. There's a great line in your poem, Letting Go, which goes, the openness of things no longer viable.
Yeah.
And I think that you like to kind of situate yourself in that openness,
Yeah.
and to try and bring together the life that what you're looking at no longer contains. And I wonder whether it was that brought you to poetry.
I don't know. That particular poem, Letting Go, it derives from the kind of photographic images that I found myself attracted to photograph. And really that appears to you in retrospect. You realize what are the things that draw you, you know?
Yes.
And I found I was being drawn towards images of dereliction and abandonment, derelict sites and so on, to the amazement of people who find you photographing an abandoned house or an old ruin of some kind, and are appalled that this is what you should be photographing in their town, you know?
Yes, yes.
There's something about the process of time that I find, though it changes everything in it, and it reforms everything, and it destroys everything, if you like to put it that way. There's something about it that I find satisfying. And that's what I'm trying to say in that particular piece, I suppose.
Yes. And
That it is as though time contains everything and doesn't actually lose anything, perhaps in the end.
And then absence seems to be a source of potential,
Yes.
as much as it is loss.
Yeah.
And so that you can conjure up what is absent.
Right.
And looking at your work, I was struck by the possibility that the combination or the interaction of openness and absence is what produces the timescapes that you talk about.
Well, I have an intense sense, because I live in a small town of 5,000 people and a small little place which I can walk around in a half hour or less. I have an intense sense of the ghosts of the place, because I know the locations intimately, and a lot of the configuration of the town, the medieval town, are still there. The West Gate,
Yeah.
Town Wall, Main Street, the old bridge, 1447, the river and the tides. You know, it's all still there, and if you shift back a generation or two, there's a whole population of people who walked those places, many of whom you know the names of. I know
Yes.
the names of, and know stories about, and know little anecdotes about. Their ghosts are still there in some sense, or the place is ghosted.
Yes.
Elizabeth Bowen has some reference somewhere to writing. What she found to be the most powerful writing was writing with some sense of hauntedness about it. It's a phrase I understand very well, I think. Something, that kind of haunting of an absent presence.
Yes, and John Montague has, I think, has spoken of that. I think
that's John Montague's phrase. That's true.
Yeah. Well, your two most recent books, All Souls and One Another, are they're unique in the type of books that they are, and they're like albums, or like what we used to have at Christmas long ago, annuals. And there's prose in them, and there's photographs in them, and there's various different kinds of verse. Some of it very funny, I must say. The whole sequence of the Carrick Nine and One Another,
which is a true story, by the way.
Oh well, you cite the Munster Express, and I certainly wouldn't want to contradict the Munster Express. But I mean that's worth the price of admission alone.
Well, yeah, I mean these guys, in the case of that story, I mean they're straight out of Mark Twain.
Yeah,
really.
Totally, and the sad end of their day out, and then you embellish it with this, what could you say, mock theory, which it struck me was borrowing from quite an old Irish tradition. In fact, the false scholar,
yes,
which Flannery O'Brien was very fond of, to name one example.
That's very true, yeah. Well, I was having fun as well, John.
Absolutely.
Because I think one of the things that I think writing should encompass is a sense of play. And, we lose that at our peril. And I'm very dubious about literary theory, really. Personally, I think life is too short for literary theory. and I'm quite interested in ideas, all right. But I feel in some respects that when the theory supersedes the text, we've gone wrong.
Yeah.
However, I was having fun there in that particular section of the book. I like to feel that I could put a book together, and the format of those two most recent books, thanks to the encouragement of my publisher, who was prepared to take them on, because in the Irish context they're very unconventional. Perhaps not in context in America, but in Ireland certainly, where verse is one kind of a book and prose is another, and you don't have illustrations and you don't have different kinds of material, whereas I wanted to mix the genres on the assumption that I could have some kind of overall thematic unity. Anyway, but that you could do all sorts of things, including having some fun between the covers on that basis.
Well, speaking of having fun, there's a poem which is hilarious to my ears, 24 Hours from Tulla.
Yes.
And I wonder, would you read that?
I will. And this remembers my friend, the poet Michael Hartnett, who died in 1999. And the occasion of the poem was suddenly realizing that it was Michael's first anniversary, when I had stopped on the road returning from a reading and needed to relieve the bladder, and had the radio on in the car, so I'll read the poem. 24 Hours from Tulla. Stopping for a leak in the County Limerick, suddenly I slip into the deep of the world. After midnight and the stars upstanding, engine idling and radio on, with Pavarotti sending E lucevan le stelle up into the night and out across blind fields where distantly a beast is bellowing some distress. I too am in the dark as I piss into a ditch to an aria from Tosca, just over the threshold of the 13th of October in the year 2000, Pavarotti's birthday, the presenter said, and also, as it happens, a poet's anniversary. A year to the day since, peeling potatoes at the sink, I was ambushed by the news of Michael Hartnett's passing, itemized before the latest update on the weather. But bravo, Luciano, bravo. Wherever you are, I'm sure candles are alight, corks popping, music swelling for your 65th live lap around the sun. Meanwhile, back in Newcastle West, my greetings to you, Michael, after your first solar circuit under sod in Calvary Cemetery, where all are teetotalers and no one complains. I don't miss chats we never had about poetics or postmodernism whenever our paths crossed, but that running ad-lib game we made of relocating songs. I want to be a part of it. New Ross, you might insist. while I'd respond with Kilfenora, where the wind comes sweeping down the plains, and one could meet a spare van, tall and tan and young and lovely, the girl from Inchigeela, lost and lonely in the Burren. Be sure of this, you'd say. If I was there, she'd sidle up beside me at the bar and sing into my ear, "Fly me to Macroom and let me play among the stars." How little I know, Michael, in this here and now, and what I think I understand reduces day by day as though I gravitate towards a baseline of unknowing that may, for all I know, be bliss. Ilucevan le stelle. In what town land am I standing? Tell me the name of that star up there. No, not the bright one, but the fainter one behind it. Behind it? Anyway, what's in a name? And who do I think I'm asking? Dark or day, it's always someone's birthday or the birthday of their death. So all together now, Michael, myself, Sinatra, Puccini, Luciano, fill my heart with song and let me sing forevermore.
Thanks so much. That was lovely. Michael Hartnett was a poet who wrote equally fluently and brilliantly in Irish and English, and I have the sense that Irish is an important connection for you. One of your pieces in the new book, In One Another, it must be a first, is it, where what you write is reproduced in various different other neighbouring languages, as it were.
Yes.
There's the Irish from down the road, and then there's Ulster speech, Scots, Irish, Welsh.
Yeah.
That was a very intriguing idea.
Yeah, well, the actual original piece is based on a character I used to know who was famous for his talk and hated for it in some respects because his tongue was so sharp. But I happen to, I suppose that piece in the book, it makes play too of the sequence in the Acts of the Apostles where the Spirit descends and they go out and they're speaking all the tongues, and they're heard from people all over the then world, yes, speaking their own. And I took that joke and referred it to local townlands, that this man could be. But I happen to know a few people writing in the other languages of the island and the islands of Ireland, and I invited them to contribute their versions in their particular lingos. So I put them together in calling it The Gift of Tongues, as another bit of fun in the book, really, well, and as a sign of linguistic diversity, I suppose.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Michael Coady. A pleasure to talk with you, and definitely a man with the gift of tongues himself.
Thanks very much, George. Pleasure to be here.
And thank you very much for watching this edition of The Writing Life.